Hello, Command29 here, another Topic of the Week video. This week I'm going to be talking about anti-heroes. This week's topic was submitted by Tumblr user mariehaptism, and their topic is: can you discuss the good and bad of an anti-hero character from their character aspects like their morality, their goals/motivations, their heroic actions, and how they are written? I'm curious about your opinion on this, since a lot of fandoms like to admire a character who is a complete douche and think they can become an anti-hero as long as they have a dark and tragic past and have unrequited feelings for the protagonist. Okay, so I don't know if you actually specifically had this in mind, but that description made me think of Hook from Once Upon a Time. That's a character who they desperately wanted to turn into an anti-hero, and it failed. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. You don't need to have unrequited feelings for people to think a character is a protagonist. Usually it's just, or an anti-hero. Usually it's having the dark and tragic past and being a dick. And then they're like, oh, they must be on the side of good. I mean, some people genuinely think stuff like that. I've been around fandoms long enough. I've seen a lot of stupid stuff. But an anti-hero, as a character, is just a basic archetype, to be perfectly honest. There's so many variations and so many different types of anti-heroes that if I was going over all of them, I'd be here all day. Now, in terms of an anti-hero is generally a character who's fighting on the side of good, or fighting against the bad. And they generally lack some of the qualities that make a hero heroic. And this can change drastically depending on the character. Some of them may lack the ideals of being idealistic that other protagonists may have. Some of them may lack the chipper attitude, or some of them are just pessimistic and cynical. Some of them are more willing to kill or break the rules. Maybe some of them are really more willing to bend things and twist things and use loopholes that are unethical in order to accomplish good goals. There's plenty of different examples of that. It's like saying, hey, can you talk about heroic characters? Well, there's plenty of different times. It's like, let's talk about protagonists. So I'm going to be talking about a few different examples of this to narrow down the focus a little bit. So there are good characters who are anti-heroes, and then there are bad characters who want to be anti-heroes. Let's just leave it at that. A good example of an anti-hero, in a lot of ways, I look towards Yu Yu Hakusho, because when I think anti-hero, one of the characters that pops to mind is actually Hiei. Hiei starts off as an outright villain, but he ends up joining the main team and becoming a good guy. He still is kind of like the dark and edgy member, and he's still a little on that, edgier side, so he's not quite the hero. And it is interesting to follow his character throughout the story, because he does have a lot of those conflicts, but he does have something more sympathetic to him that does make him a lot more easier to like. Specifically, his the whole thing involving his sister Yukina, because of all the things, what he really cares about is his sister. And there's a lot of stuff, and I'm not going to go into the whole story of Yu Yu Hakusho, but that's something that I do think really helps with an anti-hero. Like, if you're writing an anti-hero, I do think it helps to have something that you can really sympathize with them with. Because sometimes you have these characters who are, they slap on, tragic backstories, or something sad that happened to them, and it's like, they're an anti-hero now. No, it should be something that you can genuinely feel sympathetic for, because I can feel sympathetic for Hiei with his sister, because that actually it's a morality pet, really, for him. Because it's something that you actually get to see him being a lot nicer about something than he normally is. In fact, the main character of Yu Yu Hakusho, Yusuke, is an anti-hero himself. He's very much not your typical protagonist. He's crass. He's He's a jerk, an outright jerk sometimes. He really started off as just like a massive punk in the beginning. He does develop over the course of the story, but he does fall under that sort of anti-hero thing where, yeah, he's very unconventional as a hero, because sometimes he's not real heroic. Like, he is generally heroic, because they show this in the very beginning of the series when he dies. Because even though he's a punk, and even though he gets in fights, and even though he can be a dick, when push came to shove, he still sacrificed himself to save a kid. So no matter how bad, he can act, he's still a good guy. And I think that's, when you talk about, the sliding scale of good to bad, you have, good, super, super goody two-shoes, and then you have Satan on this side. You have the anti-heroes operating more sort of in this area, because it's like, yeah, they're on the side of the good, but then, yeah, they do lean a little bit, more towards the middle in how things go. Because then when you start getting on this side, you start being more anti-villain and then, full-on villains. With morality, it is important when you're looking at the morality of an anti-hero, that they don't skew too far to the bad side. Because it's one of the problems that I see with bad anti-hero characters, is that they skew too far towards the villain side, or sometimes they're outright villains and there's nothing that actually makes them a good guy. Let me bring up Hook again, because holy crap, what the hell were they thinking with Hook? Because when Hook was introduced in Season 2 of Once Upon a Time, he was a villain, flat out, bad guy, did horrible things. The typical, bad stuff that pirates do. The rape, pillage, and murder kind of stuff. He's a thief, he's a scoundrel, he's a nasty person. Not like the good kind of scoundrel, like Han Solo, but just bad person. Which is fine, okay? He's a villain. He wants petty revenge on Rumpelstiltskin, alright? Okay, that makes sense. We get the whole backstory where Hook stole Rumpel's wife. And left Rumpel and Balefire without a mother, because she was a nasty, vile person. And then demeaned and just, humiliated Rumpel back before he became the Dark One. And then when Rumpel came back with power, he killed, his ex-wife and cut off Hook's hand. And Hook wanted revenge. Very simple. He was involved in lots of horrible stuff, particularly mass murder. I don't know, I can't remember exactly if they showed him participating in that, but at the very least, he was complacent in it. He was a player with Korra's plans, and he didn't have any issue with it as long as he got his revenge. He tried to kill the main characters, particularly Emma, which is kind of important. And you would think, okay, so he's just this bad guy by the time you get to the end of Season 2. And Season 3 comes in, and all of a sudden they try to push him as some sort of anti-hero. He's got this love for Emma, which is totally unrequited. At least, until it just suddenly isn't. And it's like, this stuff comes out of nowhere. This is not how you write this. They come up with some story eventually about how he was a sailor, and there was this stupid stuff with his brother, and it's just like, okay, tragic backstory. That might explain why he ended up becoming a pirate. That doesn't say, oh, well, that means he's actually a good guy now. I mean, seriously, of all the characters that genuinely get questioned and are generally, constantly have everyone against them, it's like you have Regina and you have Rumpel. And it's like, no matter how many times they actually did stuff that was good, it's like everything would always turn around to them being bad. And it's like, especially Rumpelstiltskin. That's one of the reasons it just, once I was checking out the show, it really pissed me off. And it's like, okay, but then Hook over here, who actually was an unabashed, outright villain, who I would say in some ways was worse than Regina. Or at least Regina tried to do some things, if only for Henry's sake. I mean, Hook was just a vile, nasty person who only had revenge on his mind. At the very least, Regina did care about Henry. It may have been twisted at first, but she did have that weird, I want to be his mother. So there was at least something there. With Hook, there was nothing. He just caused nothing but misery and pain, and he didn't care as long as he got his revenge. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he's the one who they all just feel kind of mildly annoyed at first, and then no one really kind of goes, hey, you tried to murder us. Why are we standing next to you like this? And it's because they were like, oh, let's try to make him an anti-hero. And I believe when they were advertising season 3, I believe that they had a poster, and it was like, a pirate can find redemption, or something like that. And I'm like, but where did this come from? And this is the problem with some writers, is that they try to take characters that aren't anti-heroes, and then just cram them into being anti-heroes. You can't do that. You can't just change this. There has to be some sort of process to it. If they wanted to turn Hook into an anti-hero, they could have done that. But if you're going to be redeeming a villain, you're going to need to take a slower approach to this. I would even say that they actually did it better with Rumple and Regina. But then they kept screwing things up, particularly with repetitive plot lines. It's like, what are his moralities? What's his morality? He's bad. And then all of a sudden, he just has these feelings for Emma. It's like, what? Am I supposed to feel sorry for him because he wants to bone Emma? Does that change his morality now? Apparently. Now, don't get me wrong. I understand that a lot of the fangirls went nuts over Hook. I don't remember what his actor's name, but like a lot of them thought he was hot. You know, it's fine. There are characters that I think are hot that are crazy or bad. It's like, I really like Jerry Hunt in Street Fighter. She's freaking crazy. And I'm not going to suddenly go, oh, but Jerry Hunt, she's just a misunderstood babu. No, she's really not. And I don't care if you find a character attractive. That doesn't change their morality. And the fact that that has to be said, it shouldn't amaze me at this point because I've seen this so much. But still, it's absurd. A lot of people take these characters that are villains and they really want them to be bad boys. They really want them to just be a bad boy that can be fixed by love. A lot of fangirls go nuts over that stuff. And it's like, okay, stop. I've seen people do this to characters like freaking Kylo Ren. Or even I remember back in the heyday, back around 2012, they do it with Loki. Oh boy, did they do that with Loki. But it's like, and you can tell the writers of Once Upon a Time when they were writing Hook, there was a complete 180. A complete 180. And it's like, okay, his goals and motivations just became completely muddled. It's like, and he never did anything that I would deem even heroic, mainly because the show just stopped pretending that he was a villain. It's just like, we're going to pretend that he's an anti-hero and that he's, a good guy who does some bad things. No, he's a bad guy. If you want to move him towards that, develop him. The reason why people really like characters like Zuko is that when you start off him being a villain, he's a bad guy. And then you learn more about his tragic past, and then you see how that affects him. And you see how he grows over the course of the 3 seasons of Avatar: The Last Airbender. And you see him do some good stuff, be an anti-villain at times before he ultimately decides to join the heroes. He becomes a heroic character by the end of the series. But that took 3 whole seasons. Zuko had a massive character arc. Another good example of an anti-hero, particularly one that got developed from a villain, is actually Vegeta from Dragon Ball Z. When he started when he's first introduced in the Saiyan Saga, oh boy, was Vegeta bad. He was awful. He was evil. And then over the course of the series, particularly after he suffers numerous humiliating defeats, he does soften a little bit. He moves from being an outright villain to, okay, maybe he's sort of an anti-villain. He'll work with the good guys if he has to, particularly against characters like Frieza, who there's a mutual hatred there. And then he moves to being sort of a neutral partner and kind of an anti-hero. And even when he joins the good guys, and even after the Buu Saga and going into Super, he's still kind of an anti-hero, particularly in the Resurrection F Saga when Ginyu showed up and Vegeta decided to go 5 for 5 with the Ginyu Force. Because he had those kills before and he was going to get that last one. And he is more willing to move for the kill or, be a little bit more ruthless than, say, Goku would be. But he's still on the side of the good guys. And you actually do see some of this happen in when he starts to kind of redeem himself in the Buu Saga. Especially when he makes the choice to sacrifice himself to stop Buu. It doesn't work, but that was a very selfless move that he did, particularly after he went all Majin Vegeta and caused a lot of problems for everybody. But it's like he had that development. He had years and, chapters after chapters, or in the anime, episodes after episodes of that development. If you want to do something like that with a character like Hook, you're going to need to take that, that long process. You're going to need to have some sort of planned out, it really recommended, unless you're really good at flying by the seat of your pants like Akira Toriyama was, you're going to need to plan something out. Yeah, that's one of the problems with Once Upon a Time. It was very clear that there was no real plans with this. You're really going to need to develop these characters. Like, trust me. Like, if you really want to, they could have taken Hook, and they could have developed him into a sympathetic and, anti-hero. They really could have. If they didn't just force it. It's actually a similar problem I have with the way Renji was portrayed in Bleach. Because when he's first introduced, he's just this awful, nasty person who absolutely just tortures Rukia and treats her like garbage, tries to kill everyone. And then when you get into the Soul Society arc, they try to go, oh, but he was a childhood friend of Rukia's. And he's absolutely trying to make sure that she gets executed because he's just... because he wants to, because he doesn't like her or whatever. And then once Ichigo beats him, there's a switch that flips and he's like, please rescue Rukia. Like, what? It's just a switch that flipped. And after that, he becomes a different character. Now, don't get me wrong. Renji's better than Hook by a long shot. Even at his worst, he's nowhere near as bad as Hook was. But still, it's kind of a similar problem where sort of the writer realized, I actually want them to be more sympathetic. And instead of actually taking the process, like taking the effort and going through the process of giving this character a bit of a redemption arc so that they end up having believable motivations for being on the side of the good guys instead of just being a dick or being like Hook, just wanting his petty revenge. They just flip a switch and all of a sudden the character is different. And it's frustrating as a reader to read that. And it's even more frustrating as a writer myself because I can see what they did. I can see the thought process going on. Oh, I want to change this. And they just change it. You can't make an anti-hero like that. You really can't. Another good example of good anti-heroes, you can get some of them in Star Wars. Everyone would know Han Solo. A character who was the most morally dubious character from the original trilogy, at least in the main cast, compared to Luke and Obi-Wan and Leia. Han is a bit more cynical. The way he talked, negatively about the Force and the Jedi and his disbelief before his character development where he actually became a nicer person. The fact that he was willing to shoot a man dead in a bar because he was trying to come after him and just walks away like a boss. So yeah, he's very much an anti-hero in that regard. Particularly considering that Luke is far more of a noble character as the protagonist. But one of my favorite examples of an anti-hero in Star Wars is actually Cassian from Rogue One. Rogue One did a lot of good of sort of introducing some of these elements, the seedier side of things. Because even the rebellion, it shows, had some darker aspects to it. And that makes sense. even though you see things as kind of black and white in the original trilogy, rebellion good, empire bad, which is true. Obviously, there's no like purely good people in a war. There's always going to be bad people on either side. And the thing with the rebellion is that, yeah, maybe they did some bad things, but they had good reasons to. They're fighting against an evil, fascist, totalitarian, empire. So you see this with Cassian. This is part of Cassian's character arc through Rogue One. Is that, yeah, he does some dubious stuff for the rebellion. Because he's been fighting for so long that, his life is the rebellion. He lives to fight against the empire. And if he has to do a few things that are wrong, then he'll do it. And in fact, they really introduce this in a great way in, earlier on in the movie, where he's meeting with that guy for information. The guy is injured and he can't really move around properly. So when stormtroopers start coming in on them, this guy couldn't escape. So knowing that the Empire was going to take him, torture him, and then probably just murder him afterwards, Cassian puts the gun to him and one blaster shot. And it's just like, oh. And Cassian wasn't really happy about it, but it was really a mercy killing considering what the Empire would do to him. And it really sets it up. And Cassian talks about this later on in the movie, right before, when they're gathering people to go for the mission to Scarif. Where, they have these people who have done darker stuff for the rebellion for a better tomorrow to fight against the Empire, which is just evil and awful, led by a psychopath. And they showed that these people are doing good things. They're doing some bad things, but for very good reasons. They're fighting on the side of the heroes, but they do stuff that is awful. Darker elements of espionage, assassinations, killing people just to fight against the Empire. And you can see that there are even elements of the rebellion that are fighting against each other, because you have Saw Gerrera's little group, and you saw them get in conflict with Jyn and Cassian. And you see this, and you see how everything's not really as black and white. And I really like seeing that, and this is something that I really liked with Cassian's character, particularly because you can tell he has, convictions, and he does have these morals, but he's ordered to do things that are against it, like, killing Galen Erso. And he's like, well, this is my orders, but he ends up going against it because, it's bad. And it's like, and that conflict is part of his character. Another good one, I kind of want to focus on this one at the end, is Jason Todd, particularly as the Red Hood. And specifically, one of the best interpretations I think of that was from the Under the Red Hood movie, where that movie shows that Jason Todd is doing some bad stuff. He does get involved in the gang activity. He ends up running some of it. But he makes sure that it focuses to lessen the damage. Okay, it's something very morally dubious, because he's still doing bad things, but they're doing less of that bad thing. And he's still profiting from it. So you have some questions about, is this really worth it than just stopping it? I mean, you can understand why he's doing this. You can't, because you stop these people, you take these people down, someone's going to come in and take their place. But if you control it, then you can keep it under control, at least hypothetically speaking. Now, Jason does things that break Bruce's moral codes. He kills people, which is kind of a big no-no in the Bat family. And he uses guns, which is definitely on the personal side for Bruce of a big no-no. And you can see that he thinks that you should kill someone like the Joker, because he's just going to go out and he's going to hurt. He's going to kill people. He's just going to keep doing it. He'll never stop. And he has a great line when he's having his big confrontation with Bruce at the end of the movie, where he's like, I'm not talking about Two-Face or someone like that. I'm talking about him, the Joker. Someone who will never be redeemed, will never change his ways. And, and for all that people complained about Bruce's being, holier than thou with his moral code, he does explain it quite well in the movie that if he crosses that line, if he kills people, then why should he just stop? Like, it's a slippery slope. Why should he stop at just the Joker? He just kill everyone who does bad. And one of the things about Bruce is that, or about Batman, is that, he's a vigilante. He's operating outside of the law. And he already has enough issues with police, but it's generally understood Batman helps. But if Batman starts taking the law into his own hands and starts killing people, well, then you really start losing that, like any kind of, goodwill he has with cops like Commissioner Gordon, who are one of the few people who are truly on his side. So then there are a lot of issues that come with if he crosses that line, because that's more of an understanding of, I do this stuff, but I'm not killing them, kind of a thing. And then you have this interesting philosophical dilemma, this, ideological conflict between Bruce and Jason about, justifications for not killing and then the justifications for killing. And it's one of the most interesting things I think the movie has going for it. And one of the most interesting things I think about, Jason and Bruce, as characters in their conflict. Jason being an anti-hero, and he has slid amongst the scale in different ways. At some points, I think I've seen a lot of modern, stories. Jason has moved towards being just outright anti-hero instead of being, in some cases, an anti-villain. Because he is, he still uses guns and he still shoots people and stuff, but he's working with the good guys. But one of the things that's interesting with anti-heroes is that, especially if you play them off of a character who is more idealistic, who is more traditionally heroic, you can actually have some interesting questions going on here. Like with Jason and Bruce. You can have, you can have a conflict between how they handle things. You can have drama come from that. You can have characters try to figure out the best way to handle it, because sometimes the best way might be to show mercy, and sometimes the best way to be not to show mercy. And there's a lot of interesting stuff you can do with that in a story. And there's a lot of interesting stuff you can do with an anti-hero, particularly when you play them off of a character who they would heavily disagree with. And especially if they both have a very similar goal, but they have radically different ideas about how to approach that goal. You can have entire character arcs, entire storylines based around those ideas. So really, when it comes to talking about anti-heroes, first of all, they need to be well written. I know that seems extremely basic, but it is true. The characters need to be well written. When you talk about their morality, you have to make sure that there's a balance. They can't be goody two-shoes, but they can't be too far on the bad scale, because then it becomes harder to see them as an anti-hero, because then they're like, okay, well, they're just bad. And you see someone like Hook, okay, they act bad, and then all of a sudden I'm supposed to treat them as good? Especially when they also do bad stuff afterwards? Yeah. Having a tragic backstory is only one thing. It's only one part of the character. It doesn't automatically make them an anti-hero. It does not even automatically make a character sympathetic. You can give a character a sad backstory, and it doesn't really change people's opinions of them. I mean, the phrase, cool motive, still murder, exists for a reason. A character doesn't become more sympathetic because they have a backstory that explains why they did something bad. That just helps you understand why they did it. It doesn't excuse the fact that they did it. And it's good to keep that in mind as a writer, especially when you're writing a character that you do want to see redeemed or maybe move towards being an anti-hero, is that you have to keep in mind that the audience might not just accept that change. They might not just accept, oh, well, they had a sad backstory. Okay, yeah, because you need to put effort into showing this character is an anti-hero or does change. Them having sympathetic parts to their character, like Hiei with Yukina, does really help. Because being sympathetic in some ways, or having good motivations, does go a long way for an anti-hero. It genuinely does. Even if they do something that may be questionable, if there are good reasons why they're doing it, then the audience can get attached to that, and they can respect that at the very least. Because you don't have to love an anti-hero. You don't have to agree with them. And this is one of the great things about liking characters. You don't have to agree with everything a character does to like a character. This is a problem that some people seem to have, where I say, I like this character. And it's like, they take that as a approving of everything they do. Like, no. Because I like a lot of characters that, some of them are outright villains. I like Albert Wesker. I really love Albert Wesker. He's a villain who does horrible things. I don't approve of that. But he's an interesting character that I actually really enjoy. And with anti-heroes, you can really enjoy the anti-hero without saying, oh yeah, I totally approve of what they're doing. There can be debates on whether what they're doing is good or if maybe they go too far, but that doesn't automatically... A character being likable doesn't even inherently mean that you agree with everything that they do. This is a problem where some people are like, they like a character, so they want them to be good so that they don't have to say, well, I disagree with the way they did this because that was pretty bad. And I think that's one of the problems that you have with some people, like in fandoms, and the way they approach certain characters, and it's like with Loki. It's like, oh, well, I like Loki, but I feel like if I say I like him, then I'm approving of him. So they warp the character to be a better version of themselves so that they can go, oh yeah, I really like him and I approve of everything they do. It's a really weird and kind of twisted way of looking at things, because then you have to keep changing how everything looks in order to remain, I guess, ideologically pure. To remain moral in the fandom. It's just... which is dumb. But yeah. Anti-heroes can be very interesting characters. They can actually be quite interesting. A lot of characters that I like are anti-heroes. But just make sure they're well written so you don't end up with crap like Hook. So I think that's about it for this topic. If you want to submit a topic to me, you can comment below if you're on YouTube or if you're on Tumblr. You can send me an ask and put topic, and whatever topic you want me to talk about. Just make sure to follow the rules I'll be posting down below and that I have on my About page. If you want to watch last week's topic video, you can check that out here. If you want to watch next week's topic video, you can check that out here when I get that done. So if there are any anti-heroes that you want to talk about, good or very badly written, please comment below. And thank you for watching.